July 22nd, 1944. The Soviet army storms through the iron gates of a concentration camp in Poland. Inside, they don't find victory. They find hell, mountains of children's shoes, piles of human hair. The air itself chokes them, thick with the smell of burning flesh. Even battle-hardened soldiers drop to their knees, sickened by what they see. But the horror doesn't end there, because the man behind this nightmare, the one who ordered prisoners, even children, to be burned alive, was still out there. His name was Erich Muhsfeldt, and the way justice finally caught up with him will leave you speechless. How does a man who once baked bread end up feeding people to fire? Erich Muhsfeldt's story reads like a nightmare written in ink and ash. He wasn't just a guard, he was the architect of death, chief of the gas chambers at Majdanek, master of the ovens at Auschwitz, and a key hand in Operation Harvest Festival, the single largest massacre of Jews during the Holocaust. Yet when the war ended and the questions began, he told investigators, "I only did paperwork." Paperwork. That's what he called the murder of tens of thousands of men, women, and children. But this is what that paperwork really meant. And before we expose the depths of his crimes and the shocking justice that finally found him, make sure you're subscribed to Frontline Diary, where we bring light to the darkest corners of the past. Tell us in the comments which forgotten monster you want us to reveal next, because stories like these must never die. Now let's uncover the horrifying truth about Erich Muhsfeldt. Erich Muhsfeldt was born on February 18, 1913, in Neubrück, Brandenburg, Germany. His early life suggested nothing extraordinary. He attended elementary school through 8th grade, and by age 17, he completed an apprenticeship as a baker. He married, fathered a son, and seemed destined for ordinary obscurity, perhaps even a quiet life in the Upper Silesian town of Beirut, where he learned two things young: the smell of fresh rye and the power of a clenched fist. Schoolmates recalled a quiet boy who exploded when teased, once beating a classmate with a rolling pin he carried for protection. Apprenticed in his uncle's bakery at 16, he impressed patrons with elaborate pastries and terrified assistants with sudden outbursts. But January 30th, 1933 shattered any possibility of normalcy. Adolf Hitler seized power as Reich Chancellor, and Germany began its rapid descent into totalitarian madness. Muhsfeldt eagerly joined the SA that same year. By 1937, he transferred to the SS, and by 1939, he became a full Nazi Party member. Unemployment during the Great Depression had shuttered the bakery, and in the chaos, the baker from Neubrück found his true calling in the machinery of genocide. Friends said he wanted steady pay and respect. The camps offered both, plus permission to hit back. September 1st, 1939, brought World War II's outbreak when German tanks rolled across Poland's borders. January 1940 saw his induction into the SS Totenkopfverbände. These were the notorious Death's Head units, identifiable by a skull and crossbones collar insignia. These weren't combat soldiers in the traditional sense. They were specially trained camp administrators whose sole purpose was running concentration camps and facilitating the final solution, the systematic extermination of European Jews. Theodor Eicke, Dachau's first commandant, established these units in 1934 with explicit instructions: treat prisoners as enemies of the state who were only worthy of destruction. Guards received training emphasizing strict discipline combined with extreme cruelty. Muhsfeldt absorbed these lessons perfectly. By August 1940, Erich Muhsfeldt had found his place in hell, Auschwitz. He wasn't just another guard. He was the man in charge of prisoner work commandos, the one who decided who lived long enough to suffer and who went straight to the ovens. Here, Muhsfeldt learned the system that turned murder into a daily routine. How to move human beings from train to line to gas chamber without hesitation. How to wring every ounce of labor from a starving body before it was disposed of. In Auschwitz, cruelty was currency, and promotions went to those who spent it freely. Muhsfeldt thrived. Every act of violence earned him more power. Every death made him more valuable. But Auschwitz was only his education. The real horror was still ahead. In November 1941, he was transferred to Majdanek, another camp in occupied Poland. This time, he was no longer a student, he was the teacher. His new title, Commander of the Crematorium. The SS called it Special Treatment. It meant gassing, burning, erasing. And Erich Muhsfeldt was exactly the kind of man they needed. Tough on prisoners, his file read. As Obersturmführer, he personally oversaw the construction of the new crematorium. He ordered prisoners to weld the iron doors shut from the inside because no one who entered his ovens was meant to come out. The winter of 1941 to 1942 brought a new kind of horror to Majdanek. A solution, they called it, a faster way to kill. The SS began using Zyklon B, a cyanide-based gas, inside makeshift chambers built from old barracks and shower rooms. At first, it was experimental, but by October 1942, it became routine, systematic, industrial. Majdanek soon had at least 3 gas chambers. 2 of them were cleverly disguised as showers. Prisoners, stripped, trembling, clutching their children, were told they were about to be cleaned. The doors sealed shut, and then, through vents in the ceiling, came the pellets. Zyklon B. It took 15 minutes for everyone inside to die. 15 minutes of choking, clawing and screaming until silence filled the room. Tens of thousands of Jews were murdered here. Some were shot, others beaten or starved. But in Majdanek, death was never random. It was scheduled. By the spring of 1942, Erich Muhsfeldt had turned mass murder into arithmetic. He kept a ledger, counting corpses the way a banker counts coins. He was proud when the number passed 1,000 a day. Survivors remembered his whip, made of telegraph wire. He called it his correction tool. One survivor said he corrected the count with blood. Others recalled how Muhsfeldt would beat prisoners barehanded until his knuckles split, then keep going. To him, violence wasn't just duty, it was craft. And during his trial years later, he spoke of his techniques for cremation with the same pride a baker once reserved for his pastries. He wasn't ashamed, he was impressed with himself. The baker from Neubrück had become something else entirely, a man who measured his worth in ashes. By late October 1943, strange orders began to echo through Majdanek. Jewish prisoners were told to dig long, deep trenches. The guards said it was for air defense, but the prisoners, they knew. The ground they dug wasn't for planes, it was for them. This was Heinrich Himmler's command, a final, calculated purge after a wave of Jewish uprisings across occupied Poland. It was called Operation Harvest Festival. Its goal, erase every remaining Jewish laborer in the Lublin district. Then came November 3rd, 1943. Loudspeakers roared across the camp. All Jews report for delousing. But there were no showers waiting, only guns. At Pit 5, Erich Muhsfeldt took his place, clipboard in hand, cold eyes scanning the crowd. He directed groups of 50 to strip naked and lie down inside the trenches they had just dug. Then, from the edges, SS machine guns opened fire. The killing went on for hours. Music blasted from loudspeakers, German marches, opera, even love songs to cover the screams. Every burst of gunfire matched the beat. Every silence filled with smoke and blood. Across Majdanek, 18,400 people were slaughtered. Across the Lublin district, more than 43,000 in just 48 hours. It was the largest single-day massacre of Jews by the Nazis during the entire Holocaust. Witnesses said Muhsfeldt looked energized. He laughed between shots. He even offered bottles of schnapps to any SS man who could shoot a child without flinching. By dusk, the gun barrels glowed red, bodies stacked like firewood, and Muhsfeldt, clipboard still in hand, smiled. He congratulated his men. Production, he said, exceeded quota. That night, as the snow began to fall, he returned to the crematorium, whistling a beer hall tune. "Burn the evidence," he told his crew, "before the snow sticks." And just like that, the ground that had swallowed thousands was turned to ash. By May 1944, Erich Muhsfeldt had earned a reputation inside the SS. He wasn't known for bravery or loyalty. He was known for precision, the man who never lost count. Auschwitz-Birkenau was expanding fast, flooded with trains from Hungary, nearly 500,000 Jews in just a few months. To handle the flow, the SS needed someone efficient. They chose Muhsfeldt. He was placed in charge of crematorium 2 and 3, the largest in the camp. Machines built to erase human life. But even death had its mechanical limits. When the furnaces jammed or broke down, Muhsfeldt had a solution. He'd say, "Push the living in first. They're softer. They fit." Dr. Miklos Nisli, the camp's forced pathologist, remembered how Muhsfeldt boasted about his invention, the sardine method. Bodies stacked in alternating layers, children, then adults, to create better airflow, efficient burning, faster turnover. To him, murder wasn't horror, it was logistics. Survivors described him as always drunk, a swaggering sadist who carried a heavy wooden truncheon everywhere he went. He didn't just enforce rules, he invented reasons to break bones. One day, a prisoner smiled, just smiled, at a wagon driver. Muhsfeldt saw it. He walked over, calm and deliberate, and drove his fist into the man's jaw. Teeth shattered. The prisoner fell. Then came the boots, to the ribs, the spine, the skull, until there was nothing left to hit. He wiped his hands, adjusted his collar, and went back to work. At Auschwitz, death had many faces, but none were as cold or as proud as Erich Muhsfeldt's. Another story from the camp exposed just how far Erich Muhsfeldt's cruelty could go. One night, after beating a prisoner until the man collapsed, Muhsfeldt didn't stop. He grabbed a wooden shovel handle, pried open the man's mouth, and rammed it down his throat with such force that it tore through flesh and tissue. Then he simply walked away. The prisoner lay there for hours, the handle still sticking out of his mouth, slowly dying. As chief of the crematorium, Muhsfeldt ruled the camp through terror. He would stroll among prisoners and whisper, almost casually, "I'm getting you soon. I'm warning you. I'm burning you alive." It wasn't a threat. It was a schedule. He meant every word. When drunk, he liked to lecture prisoners about Nazi racial science. Then he'd test his theories, ordering beatings to see which skulls looked more Aryan. One night, he poured gasoline over a Russian prisoner, struck a match, and watched as the man ran screaming into the barbed wire, burning alive. By morning, Muhsfeldt fined the camp barber for untidy hair on a corpse. Dr. Miklos Nisli, a camp doctor who worked under Muhsfeldt, saw more than anyone should. He once watched as Muhsfeldt executed 80 prisoners one by one with a shot to the neck. Later, Muhsfeldt complained to him about chest pains and headaches. Nisli told him it was probably from stress, from killing so many people. But Muhsfeldt snapped back, saying it made no difference whether he shot 80 or 1,000. His only real problem, he said, was drinking too much. January 17, 1945. The ground trembled with the sound of Soviet artillery. The Red Army was closing in on Auschwitz. Inside the camp, chaos. The SS began evacuating, thousands of prisoners forced into a death march through the freezing snow. Leading them was Erich Muhsfeldt. 3,000 women stumbled through the blizzard, and anyone who fell was shot where she lay. As the front drew nearer, Muhsfeldt made his move. He stripped off his SS uniform and slipped into the coat of a regular German soldier, just another face in the collapsing Reich. He thought he could disappear. But months later, near Passau, American soldiers caught him. A routine check, one sleeve lifted, and there it was, the small tattoo every SS man carried under his arm. Blood type, his mark of death, that's how they knew. When questioned, he claimed he was only a supply clerk. Just paperwork, he said, nothing more. But investigators opened his diary. Neat columns, precise handwriting, names of victims written beside calorie counts. He looked at it and shrugged. "Evidence for headquarters," he said. January 1947. In a cold courtroom under US military command, Erich Muhsfeldt finally faced judgment. He was charged with atrocities committed at Flossenbürg, one of the satellite camps where prisoners were forced to build parts for Germany's secret Phi-2 rockets. Survivors stepped forward. They told the court how Muhsfeldt beat inmates unconscious for the smallest things, sometimes for nothing at all. One man remembered being attacked simply for stealing air. But many camp records were gone, destroyed during the evacuations. So much horror, left without paper proof. Still, the judges heard enough. They sentenced him to life in prison. But far away in Poland, people were furious. They knew his worst crimes hadn't happened in Flossenbürg. They'd happened on Polish soil, in the gas chambers, in the crematoriums, in the death marches. Poland demanded him back. And months later, they got him. When Muhsfeldt arrived in Kraków, chained and surrounded by guards, he didn't look broken. He smiled at the cameras, smirking at reporters. "Back to the east," he said. "The weather suits me." November 24th, 1947. Kraków. Inside Poland's Supreme National Tribunal, the Auschwitz trial began. For 1 month, the courtroom filled with the voices of survivors, each one dragging horror back into daylight. Among them was Dr. Miklos Nisli, the same prisoner doctor who'd once worked under Muhsfeldt in the crematorium. Now he faced him across the courtroom. Nisli described the sardine method, where bodies were stacked tighter than cargo. Muhsfeldt only smirked. "Science needs data," he said. He once told a Polish prisoner, "If you Poles weren't such fools, we wouldn't have to burn you in the crematoria." Now, those same Poles sat in judgment. When one survivor, Helena's mother, took the stand, Muhsfeldt couldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at his boots. The verdict came on December 22, 1947. Guilty. Crimes against humanity. Sentence, death by hanging. His lawyers begged for mercy, citing his family. The court refused. January 24, 1948. Montelupich Prison, Kraków. Guards led Erich Muhsfeldt, 34 years old, into the execution chamber. The method was chosen with purpose. No modern gallows, no quick drop. Just a metal hook in the wall, the same kind he had once used on his victims. They placed him on a wooden stool, tied a rope to the hook above, then kicked the stool away. He didn't fall far enough for his neck to break. He gasped, twisted and kicked at the air, strangling slowly for minutes. Reporters wrote that the room stayed silent except for the creak of rope. Asked for last words, he muttered only 4. "I followed orders." When it was over, Polish authorities made one final decision. His body was sent to medical students at Jagiellonian University, dissected as an anatomical specimen. Afterward, he was buried in an unmarked grave, the soil sealed with concrete. "So nothing grows," said the warden. Later reports said his wife died in an Allied air raid. His son vanished on the Russian front. There was nothing left of Erich Muhsfeldt. No family, no grave, no trace. Only the memory of the evil he created. There were no tears shed for him, none deserved, none given.